Hi, everyone. Today, my name is Frances Echeverria. I'm an early childhood mental health consultant with the Early Childhood Council, and I'll let my other coworkers introduce themselves.
I'm Deb Benali, and I also am an early childhood mental health consultant with the Early Childhood Council in the San Luis Valley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Trujillo, and I am the mental health reflective coach on our mental health team here at the council.
So we thank you for joining us today about our informational PowerPoint. And today we're going to be talking about developmental trauma. Okay, so what is developmental trauma? Developmental trauma is the result of abandonment, abuse, and or neglect during the first 3 years of a child's life that disrupts cognitive, neurological, and psychological development and the attachment to adult caregivers. So, how does developmental trauma affect the brain? A child with developmental trauma may have an amygdala that is larger than the amygdala of a child without trauma. The amygdala is our survival brain. It's the part of our brain that helps us flee a burning building or lift cars off babies. So the amygdala tends to deal with the fight or flight response. So when that's activated, that is actually sending stress hormones throughout our body or the kiddo's body. So when kids have experienced trauma, that means that there are more than likely more stress hormones going in their body, which again has all these effects on, cognitive. So that's learning, social emotional learning, attachment to caregivers. So or attachment to, any adult or kids that may be involved in their lives. And again, it's that really heightened response to a stress, either perceived or actual stressful or threatening situation. How does the amygdala operate? So when babies are born, their behavior is driven by the amygdala. They're in survival mode. Babies cry when they're cold or hungry or need connection. And over time, as their needs are met by their respective caregivers and teachers, they learn to be able to soothe themselves. So other parts of the brain, like the frontal lobe, are getting, more formed, and they're not solely in that survival state. So when they're learning that their needs are being met by their communication of when their infant's crying, they are able to become attached to the adults and caregivers in their lives. And they learn to trust that they will get their needs met. So this is a really important phase for kids to understand that, adults are hearing them and understanding what they're trying to communicate, even when they don't have the language to communicate verbally what their needs may be. So it's very important to be, attuned to these infants and babies and kids so that they can learn to develop that trust and attachment, which will help bring them out of that constant survival state. If a child's basic needs are not met, whether it be in the home, at school, in the environment, if they're not met as infants or young children, they do not learn to soothe themselves because they cannot trust that their needs will be met, and they remain in survival mode. So again, this really, really affects attachment with kids. And again, if they're constantly in that survival mode, the stress hormone is going out through their body, which has all the effects that we talked about on physical health, learning, attachment, which are huge areas in a kid's life. So the meeting the basic needs and kids learning to trust adults, then they learn to soothe themselves, and they learn that, the world is a safe place, hopefully. We can't hear you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was muted. I just want to take a minute to share that this is going to be a series.
Oh.
And it's going to be more than one PowerPoint on trauma, because we've experienced, all of us, trauma the last year, but it's more than just what we went through. Frances said at the beginning, we're looking at abuse, neglect, mental health issues with parenting. All of those things can impact how a child develops. And this will help guide you when working with kids in your classroom. Be careful with your words. Children in school who perceive, not whether you're doing it or not, but it's the child's perception of whether a teacher or staff member is yelling at them, resorts to one of three survival responses. And Frances mentioned these earlier: freeze, flight, or fight. Do not yell at me. If I am coming from a developmental trauma situation, you don't know if I'm going home to a daily neglectful situation or not. So please do not yell at me. I will fight, freeze, or flee because the yelling triggers my amygdala or my survival response. The freeze response. Children in a freeze response can look like they are not listening or attending to the adult who is speaking to them. They might not answer questions that are asked of them in that moment. They may look at you and you think they're hearing you, and they're not, because they are in a freeze response. They cannot react. Flight response. A child in a flight response will move away, leave the room, or ignore the adult as they are walking past. And remember, this is all about the child's perception of how they are viewing being talked to. You may not be yelling, but if they perceive that you are yelling, they're going to flip into one of the responses. Fight response. Children in a fight response will defend themselves by any means necessary. Talk back, yell back, throw things, curse, punch, tip things over, all of those things, because they are in their survival response.
What should the adult do when a child is in an elevated state? Children with developmental trauma need adults to remain calm and in control. So when we think of that, think about your body language and your tone of voice when you're speaking to the child. When adults model calm and controlled behavior, children can feel the same. They can also feed off of you. So if you are in an elevated state because they did something that was upsetting, they will also feed into that. So if you need to step away and take a few minutes to take a deep breath and then intervene, then please do that. When a child needs correction, using blame-free and positive language will reduce their shame trigger and help them to stay present in the situation. So if you resort to negative talk or blaming the child for what has happened, they're more than likely just going to shut down. Balancing the child's individual needs. So finding balance for a traumatized child in turmoil with the safety of other class or family members can be challenging. So remember, be firm, be consistent, and be caring. And this is our reference to the book that we got our information for this PowerPoint. And as always, we have included the Early Childhood Council logo and our contact information. So if you have further questions, would like more information, or just need some support, we're here for you.
And be on the lookout for chapter 2.
Yeah, this will be a good series, all to do kind of with helping teachers to support kiddos who possibly have experienced trauma. And we hope that, you gain some insight and maybe are able to reflect a little bit more on the behaviors you might be seeing in your classroom. And as Catherine said, please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have questions or want additional support. And thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
See you next time.